I'm here today with Ranjani Natarajan. I think I said that right? Roughly. Excellent. Cool. From Sixter Games, and she's going to be here talking to you about introduction to roles in production. So over to you.
Hello. If you can not hear me, let me know. I see a lot of sleepy faces here. I'm quite sleepy as well, so I'm going to keep it quite informal. If you have any questions, ask me at the end. I'm also around for about 30 minutes after. Just grab me when you can. So that's me. I'm Ranjani, and I've been in a games company for about 2.5 years now, and I'm quite literally bridging the gap between education and industry for you, because I'm just here to talk to you about what I've done briefly, what I've learned, and what I think I would have appreciated knowing before going in. So let's take a look. So the obligatory introduction is I grew up in India. I worked in finance. I worked at a credit rating company and then an equity trading company, so not your typical start to games. I moved to this country and I studied accounting, and I was unemployed. So while I was unemployed, I picked up running, and I grew up on adventure games like LucasArts, Curse of Monkey Island, things like that, so I love story-based games. And I found this running app called Zombies Run, which tells you a story as you run longer distances. And I started following them on Twitter. They had an internship opportunity. I applied, I got the role, wow, and that's how I entered the industry. Got the internship, hung around for about 2.5 years. They still haven't kicked me out. So that is a famous movie. I hope somebody recognizes it, Ratatouille. And it's one of my favorite movies because it has a quote that goes, "Not everyone can be a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere." And the reason I like to share this movie and that quote is because games as an industry right now is nothing like any of the other industries out there. People come from all walks of life. I was a boring bean counter, and I'm working a games job. I know people who've been doctors and who've started over and joined games companies. People come from all over the place, so it's not like you have to have a particular type of portfolio, a particular type of background, a particular type of privilege in order to make it in. And I think that's a really important message to reinforce, and that's why I like to say not everyone can have a games career, but a games career can come from anywhere. I'm going to keep with the Ratatouille references. You'll have to put up with it. So, breaking into the games industry. That's Remy. He's trying to steal some food from an old lady's house, and this is him feeling a bit reflective and saying, "Oh God, what's gone wrong with my life?" And that can feel like you a lot of the time when you're trying to apply for jobs and you're not getting any responses, especially when, if you're interested in the games industry, you're really keen on getting a job there, and you keep getting rejections from everywhere. If you are either a developer or an artist, then the role is a bit more streamlined. Your entry process is a bit more traditional because you have certain hard skills, and you've been working on them through your student career. You've been building your portfolio, working with other companies, and you know where to apply and what to put on your resume when you apply there. But what if you aren't a developer? What if you aren't passionate about making a game? And what if you just want to work at a games company because you think you can contribute and you like playing games, but not much more than that? That's why I wanted to talk about production roles, because these don't tend to get talked about generally at student fairs. So if you're not a developer or an artist, there are a lot of different roles available to you. So the first thing I've listed there is quality analysis or testing roles. This is one of the more technical non-developer roles where you are either quite literally playing on a console or playing on a mobile, trying to break a game that your company's made, or you do a little bit more coding and you write tests that you run on the developer's code in order to find a way to break it. And that's usually how it works in bigger AAA studios, because games run for about 80 hours and you can't literally have human beings that play the entire game multiple times, but you will have human beings that write bots that play the games multiple times. And That's a pretty popular role if you have some kind of development experience or coding interest, but you don't want coding to take over your entire life and career. Other things, sound engineering, voice acting, voice direction. So this is when, when you play a game, you're hearing music in there, you're hearing environmental sounds, things like that. That's what I mean by sound engineering. Voice acting and voice direction is also a huge thing in games now, especially with mocap and more animated games becoming popular. And in my company as well, in Zombies Run, we have audio that plays while you run, which has actors that are being directed by a person. And all you need there is a theater background, training as an actor, experience doing all that. So it's not like you need to be a hardcore games player and have technical skills and things like that in order to become a voice actor or a director. You do different things instead. Writing, game design, this is where you are either writing the story or writing the levels of a game. They are very different things, but they interact with each other quite strongly because you have the story that's the overarching plot of your game or the overarching narrative of your game, and you have design, which is how do you send the player through this? How do you create a journey for them from point A to point B to point C to resolution? That is a very interesting field to be in right now because narrative games, interactive fiction, things like that are really taking over. Finally, producer, logistics, community management, they have nothing to do with each other, but I stuck them in one bullet point because the slide was getting too big. I'm a producer. The person who spoke previously, Amandeep, was a producer as well, and I think we do very different things. Producer is a generic title given to somebody who organizes something in one of the different games companies, and the role varies from company to company. So in my case, I help work on the app. So I help the developers decide what to work on next. I do some testing myself. I take decisions when there's some kind of design thing to be made, when the product owner isn't available. I work on customer support as well. I work on logistics, which I've listed as a separate thing there, and work on the community as well. What I mean by logistics is, a lot of companies are now doing Kickstarters, Indiegogo, crowdfunding, things like that. And even though a games company just releases a game that might be printed onto a disk or as a digital download or on your mobile, things like that, more games are publishing merchandise. So you'll have T-shirts, you'll have collectible miniatures. That's a huge industry, lots of money in there. And you will have to send these to the people who buy them. And that's basically what logistics is. It's a huge opportunity in the industry that more people are joining. Community management is everything from the simple forum management situation. So you have users of a game, you have an official forum, and the company moderates it. Something as simple as that to something a bit more complicated like customer support, to something even more complicated like running events and public relations for your company in different cities around the world. And that's a pretty interesting field to be in. You might not think that it's related to games, it's more event management, but games events are very different from normal industry events for other things, and it takes a particular skill to be able to manage a bunch of rabid fans, basically. So that's roughly an overview of non-developer, non-artist roles in the industry. And I think it's a little bit harder for you as a student to decide that this is what you want to be doing. And I think I would have gotten pretty annoyed at somebody who told me that I had to know as a student what I wanted to be doing with my career 10 years later. So there are a few general things that you can do because you're interested in games and you want a job there, but you're not necessarily going in as a developer or an artist. The main thing to remember is the initiative experience spectrum. That's not an official thing, that's just what I call it. And basically, that means it's one line. On one side, you have initiative. On the other side, you have experience. And as you grow older, you travel from initiative towards experience. So when you're a student, you come to university, you attend classes, you go back, you maybe do official reading, tinker with a little bit of code, maybe sometimes, probably not. And that's it. What do you do with the rest of your time? You might feel as a student you don't have enough time. But the industry is getting really competitive. And what makes a CV stand out now is a student showing initiative. Initiative, in many cases, is about making your own game or starting your own game studio or going to a games jam. And that's great. If that's your interest, you should absolutely pursue that. That's the best way to show that you are qualified for something, by making the thing. But what about people like me, who didn't want to make a game, still doesn't want to make a game, but wants to work in a games company? What you can do is do things like part-time roles or internships with companies that have these kinds of small jobs that might know your name and remember you for a later role. You can get into personal projects, not necessarily making games, but volunteering at local events so that you get to know the local games community. Odd little things like that create a memory of your name in other people, and they think, oh, hey, remember that person, Ranjani, that showed up to this thing? She might be a good fit for this. That kind of thing is very important in games, because even though it's still a very modern industry, it's very old-fashioned in terms of things like word of mouth and apprenticeship and all of that. So that's something you just need to remember. Plan, but also review, is good advice for life in general. But as a student, you might have some ideas of what you want to be doing. Here's your path through university and through to your first job, things like that. And you'll go in with the best of intentions, and then life happens. Life happens to everybody. So you need to remember that your original plan is something that you as a person were attached to and you created, and you need to review it, not necessarily every week, but once a month, once in 3 months, things like that. Just go back and look at what you decided you wanted to do. See if you are still that person. When you're 18 to 24, you are never the same person that you were 3 months back. So it's important that you look at your original idea of what you wanted to do and keep reviewing it and keep seeing what changes you want to make to it, what new things you should be doing, what you've learned now and how you can apply that to your original plan, things like that. These are obvious things, but I wish somebody kept repeating them to me when I was a student, because I just never listened to other people when they did that, and I wasn't told it enough, and I didn't care. Finally, there is no escaping the code. So if you're not a developer, you might think, can I get through life without writing any code? And unfortunately, in today's world, the answer is no, because any kind of role requires you to fiddle with the game's code at some point. Because game engines, like we discussed in the previous session, are getting more accessible. Things like Unity, for example. A lot more companies are getting people like writers and artists and sound designers and testers to interact with Unity directly and getting some kind of, and not necessarily Unity, I'm just using that as an example, but getting familiar with how code looks, being able to read it, not necessarily write it yourself, but being able to read it and know what something's referring to, how to figure out where something's being called and what groups of functions relate to what things. Just basic understanding of how to look at code and see how does this thing work. That is a really useful skill. So once you are in the industry, which I now am, I've been for about 2.5 years, you tend to learn a few things. And I figured it might be useful for you to understand that now. That was my alternate title for the slide, The Growing Pains of Dude Bro Companies, and we'll come back to that. I don't mean it offensively. The first thing is communication. Communication is really important in general, but more important now because you no longer have companies that are just in one room where you can just roll your chair over to another person and talk to them. Companies now have distributed teams that work across the world and in different time zones. And sometimes you are a remote worker and you are working with someone else who is also a remote worker in a completely different time zone. And you have to make that conversation work somehow. Whatever you compose in your head is perfectly clear to you, but when you write it down, when you say it to somebody else, it needs to be clear to them. And that is a skill that comes with time, and the more you practice writing down your explanations clearly, the better you get at it. Increasing sense of disconnectedness. Again, in the last 2 to 3 years especially, the more you interact with people from the industry, the more you'll realize that different disparate teams that are distributed across the world don't really tend to feel connected to each other. Especially the larger your company gets, the smaller the scope of your work, and the less you feel like what you're doing relates to the larger product that's eventually released. Especially because in games, the lead time can be 3 to 5 years even. And if you're working on a tree in some corner of some level of a game, you're not going to feel like anyone's going to come to that point in the game and see it. What's the point of you having made it? And it's not just about that. It again goes back to remote working. It again goes back to companies being siloed and not being able to meet other companies in the industry unless they come to events like this. There's this increasing sense of what is my place, not just in this company, but in this industry and in this world. The crunch culture cycle. So crunch is something you may or may not have heard about, and it's endemic to games companies, although crunch on its own happens in every industry. There's always a deadline. When people are involved, when moving parts are involved, people tend to miss their deadlines. They'll work 12 hours, 14 hours every day the last month before the deadline. That just happens in every industry, and it's a part of human nature. Crunch is slightly different. Crunch is when you're doing this all the time, and it's the default expectation that your company has of you. So you're paid £30,000 a year to do a job for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, is the bottom line that you see on your contract. But when you go to the company, you realize that they expect you to be there 7 days a week and on call all the time, even when you're outside of work hours. And you're just expected to be working all that time in order to meet the deadlines that they set, because they set those deadlines assuming that people will work this hard. And that's basically what crunch culture is. And there's a conversation around it now. More people are being open about it. But we're still in early days, and it's just getting talked about. Not much is being done about it, even though people have accepted that this is the state in the industry, and it is not a good state, and we should do something about it. So just be aware that this might be something endemic in whatever company you join, and be self-aware that you may have to draw some lines for yourself that you weren't originally prepared to. Games-flavored misogyny and lack of formalization. Let's go back to the alternate title. So when I say a dude bro company, I don't mean it offensively. You may be a guy, you may say dude, you may say bro, you may have a bunch of friends, male friends that you decide to start a company with. All this is great. But a dude bro company is a company that decides that it will use language like, hey guys, how are you doing? Instead of, hey folks, how are you doing? A dude bro company invites people for events and offers just beer and pizza. You don't think about vegans or vegetarians or people who don't drink alcohol, just, simple things like that. A dude bro company is also a company where the men talk to each other in a certain way and talk to the women in a different way. Whether you like it or not, this is real. And whether you like it or not, it will happen to you or it will happen to somebody that you know. And that's general misogyny you will see in any company, but in a games company, it's a little different, because games is an industry where people tend to be passionate about the thing that they're making before they get into it. And there's a sense of gatekeeping in that if you're not passionate enough about what you do, maybe you don't deserve to work here. Maybe you don't deserve to be in this industry. You're not a real gamer. That kind of idea is more prevalent than you'd like. And it really shows in the way people talk to each other in companies, the way people work with each other in companies, and it's something you really need to have your eyes open for. You might see it at university, you might not. It depends. Most universities tend to skew liberal and more equal, so you might not see it, which is great. But it's a very different world out there, where you'll be working with people from different cultures and backgrounds, and most of them won't even realize that this is the kind of coded language and behavior that they're using. Lack of formalization. So again, a dude bro company that you started in your garage with 3 of your best friends, and you made this game that really took off, and you realized, oh my God, I need to hire an office manager and get an office, and I need to have more people who work for me, and things like that. What happens in a games company that grows from 3 people to 20 people is that they don't have the infrastructure set up in place to support 20 people. When it's 3 people, you can text each other and say, hey, I'm not feeling great today, I'm not coming in. But if you have 20 people, someone's going to be reporting to somebody else, or they're going to be reporting to the CEO. And the CEO is going to bite off the head of the junior-most person who said, I'm sorry, I can't come in today. In a dude bro company, you don't have an HR department, you don't have titles, job roles that are specific and give you a sense of security regarding what your position in that company is. And this is a lot more common than you'd like. So you need to be aware of the fact that these are things that may happen to you. You might join a company expecting the role to be something, and it'll turn out to be something completely different. And someone will ask you to do something you were just never hired for. And it's not just about stepping out of your comfort zone, it's taking advantage of how little they're paying you. So these are all things that you will need to keep an eye out for. If you're working in a games company, these are some things that you might want to keep in mind. And it kind of applies to any kind of company you work in. I like to say, be a mop and remember to come back to your bucket. Again, I like to say a lot of dumb things like this. You just have to deal with me. So I look at a mop as something that you take out of a bucket and go mop different floors of a building. The mop picks up dirt and water and things like that from lots of places and comes back to its bucket and just marinates in that bucket, where it might have original dirt it picked up from somewhere else. And then the next day, again, it's shunted out to go and clean other floors. So think of yourself, however unsanitary it might be, as that mop. Think of yourself as someone who's just joined a company and is trying to figure out what you want to do, doesn't know, and decides, I'm just going to do as many different things as there are. Remember that you have to balance this with not being taken advantage of, but also remember that this is an industry that is in great flux, and because of the dude bro background that we have, you won't necessarily have a specific role you were hired for that you just keep doing the job for. You will have to do multiple things. Your role may transition. Just be open to doing all of that, but come back and remember the original thing that made you want to work here. Come back and remember that these are the skills that you wanted to develop and improve for your next step in your career. And do all those things outside of the jobs that you're doing in that company to prove yourself there. The harsh work versus life trade-off. So again, this is part of crunch culture in that you will have to work long hours sometimes. But depending on your company, they might be a bit aware of that, might let you, be flexible about your work hours and things. When you can, please take the opportunity to do it. Don't think that your job is insecure. Don't think that you need to prove to this company you deserve to be there, and therefore every single time that you can actually work, you will be working. Because that is unhealthy for you, and it's bad for the company as well, because you will eventually just burn out. So remember that you need to balance the development of your personality and your personal skills in addition to your job and your role at the company. Have a daily stand-up with yourself, even if your company doesn't. So a stand-up is one of those buzzword business terms that people like to use these days for a stand-up meeting, which is basically you and your team gathering together. You're standing up so that you're inclined to keep it short, unlike my talk. And you talk to each other and you say, this is what I've done since the last update. This is what I will do for the next update. Are there any things that are blocking me today? So is there anything standing in my way? So these are 3 things that if you just look at your day, every single day, and think, what have I done so far? What am I planning to do next? And is there anything in my way? It'll help you just plan your days and make sure that you're on track for your goals, not just your personal goals, but for your job goals and your company's goals as well. And finally, if you've just joined a games company, you need to find your community, because in your company, you're going to feel quite isolated. You're going to feel part of your tiny team that does that one particular tree on that one level, and you need to figure out how to meet other people who do the things you do, who might be doing the things that you want to do in future. And the way you do that is, well, it's complicated. I have a few suggestions. It's very woolly. What can you do? So the first thing I'd suggest is joining the ukgamesindustry.com Slack. So it's a Slack that has about 1,200 to 300 people on it so far, and it's only a year old. But that's where you have a lot of discussions about the industry with people who you don't actually work with, and you make contacts there that you wouldn't necessarily do because you might never meet them in person. That's a Slack you can only join once you've joined a games company, so write that down and keep it safe for when you actually do. Meetups, conventions, and talks. So find your local meetup hotspot. There's the app, of course, but there'll also be chatter on Eventbrite and Twitter and Facebook. Figure out how to go to events, show your face to other people, keep showing your face to other people, and make them remember your face and your name. And talk to people, because it always feels good to know someone else is going through the same things you are, or someone else who's much more senior has gone through the things you have and can tell you how to get out of them, or show you how they got out of them at least. Find an active or a passive mentor. So an active mentor is somebody who you've contacted and they say, look, I can see the path that you're on. Here's what I'd suggest. And maybe you talk to them for an hour every 2 weeks or something just to say, this is what I've been doing. What do you think I should be doing next? Now, the problem with games is that a lot of people you try to contact in this way are going to be really busy and won't have that kind of time to spend on you. So that's why I say find a passive mentor. So these are people that you know work in the industry doing the things you want to be doing. Follow them on Twitter, follow their blog, follow what they're doing, maybe go see them talk or go to their company when they have open days and things like that, and try and see what they're doing and see if that's something you can do yourself in a smaller way, perhaps. And at your 2-year mark, join something called BAFTA Crew. So BAFTA is the British Academy of Film and Television Awards, and they're trying to expand their games division. And they have this program called BAFTA Crew that I'm part of this year. And what they do is basically invite you to events and help you meet a lot of influential games people that you normally wouldn't. Again, this is all about networking and meeting and things like that. It's inevitable. I'm very antisocial. I still have to put on a game face and do it anyway. You just learn to put up with it at some point. And with BAFTA Crew, you tend to get a lot of opportunities. Like I've given a lot of talks this year because I'm part of BAFTA Crew. This is one of them. And I'd suggest that as the best way for you to fast track your career outside of your company. And finally, I've told you how to get the maximum of what you can so far. Here's what you should give back. Share your experience and tell other people what you've gone through and how you've gotten here, because the way that I've gotten here is very different from the way other people would have, and something I've said today might give you an idea, I don't know. And you might help somebody else that way. And games is just this tiny industry that's just all about giving to each other, helping each other out, and you help someone out, someone else will do a good turn for you one day. Give everyone a few chances. Remember Ratatouille always. So there will be people who rub you off the wrong way. There will be people who are from a different generation and just don't know how to talk to you. There will be people that you think are being sexist or bigoted, and you just don't know how to deal with them in your company. And in games, because there isn't that infrastructure to give you the walls to protect yourself from that kind of thing, you will have to deal with it. Give people a few chances, see if you can continue there. And if you can't, stand up for what you believe. Either you or someone else you know will be experiencing some of these things, and the only way the industry, this ephemeral thing, is going to change is if you, the people inside the industry, change and encourage that change. And by pointing out that something's wrong in your company or in your team or with some friends that you're part of a friend group of, that's the only way to make sure that in general the standard rises. And giving back is just your way of saying, I'm here, I like what I do, and I want to make this a better place for the people that follow me. Thank you for listening, and go watch Ratatouille.